The prodigal son returns. Love that. The Chris Johnston Show featuring Cobourg's very own Chris Johnston alongside me. We're going to be at Boston Pizza Cobourg on 1111 Elgin Street West on January 17th for a live podcast recording. I am super excited for this. I'm over the moon.
Yeah, it's going to be so cool. I mean, a Friday night. What else are you doing? You're going to Boston Pizza. They've recently completed a renovation. It was already the place to go anyway if you want to watch a game, dine with your family. It's the spot. And on Friday, January 17th, you can see Steve Dangle, Adam Wilde, Julian McKenzie, Chris Johnston, and a whole host of other characters. We're going to have a meet and greet. We're going to have some banter, tell some stories. I bet Cobourg Papa will make an appearance too.
I can't wait to meet Cobourg Papa for the first time. Doors will open at 5. The podcast will start at 6, and then we'll be able to meet you guys after that episode has been recorded. It's an exclusive ticketed event with limited capacity. First come, first serve for tickets and tables, which we will be filling to capacity. Secure your ticket now. Event is sold based on seat, not table. Therefore, you may be required to sit with other groups, but still, you can make friends with everyone there. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be great. Get your tickets now for the live CJ show in Cobourg, January 17th.
Let's go Cougars.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
CJ, we have to keep up with the most invigorating saga around the NHL. Elias Pettersson versus JT Miller. Just seems like whenever we want to stop talking about those two, or whenever the Canucks don't really want us to talk about those two, that story seems to return to the spotlight. They have a 5-game road trip starting this week, and the story is going to come up again. I'd like to know if you have any more thoughts and feelings about this story that continues to circulate around the NHL. Now people are wondering if, Pettersson has to get traded. Miller's got to get traded. You have to find a way to move both. Is there a world where both guys can stay on the team? Where are we at with this?
Well, I'd say the story for me actually isn't just one player versus another, but it's almost zooming out a little bit and saying, like, what can the Canucks do to try to get everything back together? I mean, obviously this is kind of taken on a life of its own. It's partly because there's definitely truth or elements of truth to what's been out there. Another part of it is just, it's pretty, it's a pretty glitzy type of story. Vancouver is a very passionate hockey market. Canada is a passionate hockey country. So there's a lot to chew on. And you're right. They start in Montreal on Monday. And, in the meantime, Quinn Hughes and Pettersson are both out of the lineup. They did return to practice Sunday. So I think that's encouraging in terms of seeing them at some point in the lineup on this trip. But it's, Thatcher Demko, had the back spasms recently here. So it's more about what can this team can this be a rallying cry in some way? Can they put it behind them? I mean, it's a tough trip when you look at it. They play Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday. Going through Montreal, Washington, Carolina, Toronto, not some of the better teams on the eastern side of the bracket. And in Montreal's case, obviously one of the hot teams in the league here the last little bit. So, that storyline that you're referencing, the rift, I guess it's being called, you're right that will keep getting hit on. But I think it's, as we sort of enter what's basically almost the start of the second half here is, can the Canucks win hockey games? Can they fight through the injury troubles? Can they fight through whatever distractions, the media stuff, and find a way to get things on track? Because, the parallel to that is, there certainly are trade talks happening. It doesn't seem like any of them at this point are that serious. But I think management's in a position where they feel they need to listen, just in case this reaches some sort of point of no return where the team isn't able to kind of get through this, or the players themselves, it just gets to a spot that it's completely unworkable. And so, I mean, what a strange season this has been. There's been so many, feels like teams that have got to this point, but Vancouver's still in a spot certainly to chase down a playoff position. It's not like anything's lost yet, but it feels a little rickety. You know what I mean? And it doesn't help. Certainly, that's the two of the best players right now are unavailable to them. Obviously, JT Miller was unavailable there for a stretch of time before Christmas. They've also had to play without a lot of their best guys for chunks of the season.
Is there, I get that like maybe it's just discussions right now, so I get if you don't have a clear answer to this, but do you get a sense that the way it's going, it's leaning towards one guy getting out of here more than the other? I mean, I think I've seen people do polls on this. I think there are maybe a section of fans who would much rather keep EP40 over JT Miller. I think there are fans who would probably want the opposite. Again, there are people who probably think both of them could stay. There are probably people who think both could leave. But do you get a sense that management could be swaying either way?
Well, I think it's a bit of a conundrum because Elias Pettersson has no trade protection, meaning he can't block a move until July 1st when it kicks in. So he is the younger player. He is the player that there's no restrictions in his contract when it comes to a trade. And, I think that he would certainly be, pretty attractive piece for a lot of teams. But for those reasons, you might be inclined to move Miller, but Miller has a full no move clause. And, what I can tell you at this point is certainly he's not going to management and asking for a trade. I'm not sure if he would waive his NMC. I mean, at this point, that's a bit of conjecture because, as far as I know, nothing's been brought to him to have to consider. And so, it's a dicey one because, typically you'd probably want to hang on to the younger guy, just assuming he's got better seasons in him. That being said, and we can't really look past this fully. If you go back to when Elias Pettersson signed his big extension last season, the numbers since then are not pretty. And that includes a really difficult playoffs last spring. I don't think that there's a thought that he's, I think that there's still belief he can get beyond that and be the guy that, play at the level that earned him that contract. But he's not, for consistent enough stretches of time since he signed it, played up to that level. And so there's a lot of dynamics at work here. And really, you're talking about two of the best forwards on the team, two guys signed long term. I mean, they're core pieces. And, if you're making that trade, you got to be pretty sure that, the Canucks are not trying to get bad here, right? I mean, they went through a lot of years to get to a team that, last year reached the second round of the playoffs. I mean, we might look back on last season as a year where everything went right and fell into place. And maybe it was almost a little bit beyond the level of what should be expected for them. But I mean, they still have a nice collection of players, and they got Brock Besser, who's a potential UFA this year. I mean, it just feels like, I think that it's a long way of saying I don't think that they've landed on one pathway. But, I think that this situation has got to the point, it's causing enough external distraction, but I think internal distraction at times this year where they have to at least consider their options. And so that's where you are right now. But, I can't say that both are going, either or is going. The truth is even management doesn't know. I mean, if you're trading one or both of those players, you have to be getting a haul back. I mean, there's no way around it. If you're trading a number one center unquestionably in the league, I mean, you're probably getting a number one center back. We're talking about a blockbuster, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know if that fits out there. I mean, we know last year a team like Carolina was around Pettersson, having some trade talks. I could see there maybe being a fit there from a hockey standpoint, but I don't know what the package would look like. Is there something, I don't want to start throwing names out here. We're not playing armchair. We're not on Chell here trying to make a deal. But it's hard. These are hard trades to make is what I'm saying. Even when you leave aside the trade protection stuff. So I certainly think, look, I mean, Patrick Allvin did an interview with Ian McIntyre at Sportsnet. He acknowledged on the record that anything is possible. I think anything is possible, and the Canucks are considering what the options might be. There's still a fair bit of runway here before March 7th, A, to have further talks with other teams, but B, to see how the Canucks themselves respond. And, what a big road trip this is. It's a difficult road trip with, a lot of games, and, injured players, and you're going through some markets, especially when they get to Toronto this weekend, where I'm sure that they'll be, reminded of this storyline, whether they want to talk about it anymore at this point or not.
let's dissect a potential haul here, right? Like, I think you're right. You need something massive back for either of those two players, considering what they mean to your team. Maybe a number one center back. Is this a chance for a hockey trade? Or do you think the Canucks
it has to be a hockey trade?
Has to be a hockey trade. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm not making the deal, but it feels this isn't like you're stockpiling a bunch of prospects and picks and things, because the Canucks, like, they need to sell tickets. They need to, they're also a good team. Like, I don't think you're waving a white flag by doing this. If you're making that kind of decision to trade either of these guys, it's got to make all kinds of sense for both sides. That's why I think it's going to be a difficult trade to make, because the other team, has to be willing to give something up. Right. And I think when you heard some of those rumors with the Sabres before, Christmas time, what was the deal that was thrown out there? Was it Cousins and Byram for Pettersson? Something like that.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
I don't think Buffalo is willing to do that, but that's almost the sort of thing that Vancouver would need to get back for them to want to do it. Right. And so, I mean, I should have thought more about this. What's the last significant trade? Like, Elias Pettersson is 26. He's been a 100-point scorer in the league. He's one of the top played forwards in the league. Prime of his career kind of guy. Like, when's the last time a player of that significance got traded? I mean, it's been a long time. I mean, maybe PK Subban for Shea Weber might be the deal. Like, the last
go that far back? Really?
I mean, what am I missing? The point is when you have these guys, you don't trade them in a cap world. At least that's the way it's been. Now, I think the rules, the quote unquote rules, are changing in the NHL a bit. There's definitely a shifting landscape here with the cap going up, with the CBA talks, with, it just feels like there is a little bit more. Maybe we've almost gone through this epoch where things were too settled, and you have all these franchises like facing this crushing weight of pressure, and they have to think about some bigger types of deals. So, maybe I'm living in the past a little bit when saying, this sort of thing isn't going to happen, but it definitely, if you think of recent memory back to the COVID years to now, I mean, there hasn't been a player in his prime that's at the level either Pettersson or Miller are at, quite frankly. I mean, we're talking about, those are going to be main players for the USA and Sweden and the four nations, right? Like, we're talking, pretty significant types of guys that if one of them or either of them get moved, I mean, I can't even imagine the return. That's the part of me that always, as much as it's like fun to play this game a little bit as and someone on the outside of the situation, that's where I look at it and I go, like, it's going to be tough to actually make that deal. I think it's fine to have those conversations to see what's out there, but it's a difficult spot to where you can get something. I mean, you're almost putting your job on the line as a GM if you trade a player like that, because you might watch that player go be a superstar for the next 10 years somewhere else. And if the return is a little bit light, I mean, you're going to be reminded of it every day.
Every day. Yeah. Don't mind me racking my brain trying to make sure I don't miss any significant trade on to that size. I just want to make sure we don't miss that, but you may be right. You'd have to maybe go back to.
This is going to be a situation where I'm going to get tweeted at for the next 3 days by people that are like, you missed this one. Cause that does happen from time to time where we do miss an obvious one and just.
I guess the Tkachuk Huberdeau trade. I guess it's easy to forget because Huberdeau. That probably,
do you know what? Yeah. You just saved us from getting like that.
That's it, because you're getting Huberdeau coming off his career best year, Matthew Tkachuk just before he turns into the phenom we know him in Florida. It's easy to forget now because of where Huberdeau is now and where Tkachuk is, but at that time, that was a big deal.
Right, and look at it was, with the benefit of hindsight, we can say that wasn't a deal that Calgary would make again today. I don't think. But. It was sort of, I know McKenzie Weegar's in there too, but it was still sort of player for player, right? Like they thought they were replacing an elite winger with an elite winger. Unfortunately, Jonathan Huberdeau's game has not lived up to the standard he set the last season before the deal came. That has to be the thinking, right? That's sort of there. Again, there might be other pieces in a package and all that stuff, but I think that if you're going to make this trade, you have to feel like you're getting back something pretty close to the equivalent of that player in at least one of the pieces. And there's just not that many players out there like that. And most of the teams that have them are not thinking about trading them, right? That's the flip side. Like the Avalanche aren't giving you Nathan McKinnon for Elias Pettersson or whatever. Like, you know what I mean? Like, or pick other, superstar forwards around the league. And the other problem here too, which I kind of alluded to earlier, is both Pettersson and Miller are having off seasons. And so you're potentially trading them when they're slightly diminished assets, or certainly when they're not viewed the way they might have been if you were thinking about this decision 2 years ago.
Thank God we remembered that Tkachuk-Huberdeau trade.
You saved us, buddy.
Considering how much coverage I've done on that, and you like, yeah, no,
that's God probably the closest to. But even I don't know. Pettersson at his best was Tkachuk brings a different element. I mean, it's little apples and oranges, but yeah, that's the last sort of big. And I remember I was actually traveling in Europe. That trade went down kind of in the middle of the summer. I remember like waking up and going like, whoa, when I saw the trade, because it happened late at night in the East. And so I was in bed at the time it all went down. And I remember like, that's one of the last trades where I'm like, truly like, wow. There's some other ones since, but not on that level.
Yeah. I was out with a friend for most of that day, and I didn't really check my phone. And then I was in the car on my way home, and then I saw the trade go down. I was like, that was like when big trades like that happen, and it's one thing for you to experience it, but then you go on social media and you see other people experience it. Like I think that's fun. It's not obviously for the people involved. It's a much different story, but at the end of the day, like trade activity drives the league.
Yeah. I think that was
in terms of fan engagement.
That was fun for those guys though, because Tkachuk went to Florida where he wanted, one of the three places he was willing to go. And he's since won a Stanley Cup and been to 2 finals. Jonathan Huberdeau signed a life-changing contract in Calgary. I know it hasn't maybe lived up fully to what he was hoping, but there's still, the Flames have kind of hung around. I mean, it's not a bad day for those guys. It might not be perfect, but what's that line? You don't always get what you want, but sometimes you get what you need.
I like that. That's a gem from you, Siege.
Isn't it the Rolling Stones? I mean, it's certainly not my line.
That would make sense, I guess. It does sound like a Rolling Stones line. I'm not a Rolling Stones expert, as you can
always
tell.
Get what you want.
Oh yeah, I know that one.
That's the line I was ripping off.
Yeah, please don't get us copyrighted. I think we should.
I'm not playing music. I learned my lesson. That was a one-time mistake.
We're going into 2025 with lessons learned. Is there anything else we need to carve into with this story? I guess the one question I have is just, let's say the Canucks do really well on this trip. Is that enough to shut us up with any rumor talk? Like, what's it going to take for us to get to this point where we say, okay, you know what? This story is a dead story.
Yeah. I mean, I think them playing well, those players playing well. I don't know that I'm not going to say it will happen just on this road trip, but certainly if they start winning a lot more than they're losing, December, they got they got to overtime and got some loser points, but they didn't win a lot of games. And so some of this does go in the cycle with the team isn't playing well. People start asking questions. Why isn't the team playing well? Those individuals haven't been putting up their normal numbers. Why is that? I think like some of the talk does emanate out of the results of the team. And I'll say this, having been around this league a long time, when teams are winning, you rarely get negative stories. I mean, it doesn't mean there aren't tensions or there aren't things happening, but there really is nothing quite like, successful teams. I think just it papers over a lot of the other problems. So that's the best thing they can do. And, Quinn Hughes gave a pretty good interview, I thought, on Sunday where he just said like he's literally he acknowledged the larger issues. Again, he's like it's not as complicated as some people are making it out to be. He's like, if we just sort of start taking care of business here, I'm focused today on practicing, getting back with the team. We want to win tomorrow. Like if they can actually shut all that out and just start playing well again, no one talked about this last year. The Canucks had 109 points last year and had 2 chances to get to the Western Conference Final against Edmonton, 2 chances to eliminate the Oilers. So in the second round, this wasn't a storyline during that season because so many good things were happening for the team. And so I think that would be the playbook if you're Rick Tocchet or if you're in management, is like just start winning, guys, and this will go away.
All right. We'll be back on the Vancouver Canucks at some point. I'm sure we'll talk about them at some point.
Yeah, it might maybe by Thursday. Like, who knows? I mean,
oh, good. The timing would be pretty great on that one. Anyway, let's move on. Jonathan Toews. Did you see his interview with GQ a couple of days ago? Very interesting stuff.
I did, yeah. And it's funny, Jonathan Toews, I got to know pretty well at times during his career. Was around him a lot when he was in Team Canada stuff, and was definitely always found him to be open to outside ideas that I would say you wouldn't typically have those type of conversations with the average athlete about. And so, while I didn't know the extent to the lengths he's gone here to try to, treat his immune condition, I'm not surprised to read about it. And he goes into, pretty big detail about the Ayurvedic healing process he went through with, most recently a 5-week stint in India. It involved not eating a lot of solid foods, taking things that force you to vomit, a lot of time spent on the toilet. Don't need to go more into that, but basically clearing the toxins out of his system, obviously a yoga practice and the like. And, it was interesting. It opened the window too, I think, to just how difficult of a time Toews has had. You might recall he missed one season, one of the COVID years entirely while he was trying to get a handle on this. Came back and played 2 years, but didn't look or feel like himself. His last game coming in 2023 in Chicago, and he's been on sort of like a spiritual and physical journey to try to find out some answers about his body, try to get where he's feeling healthy again, and the little nugget at the end that got the hockey world talking. And it's funny because I don't know if people read the quote closely enough, but he said something to the effect of, there's a part of me that thinks my career isn't over. Which isn't the same as saying like, it's killing me and I have to, restart my career. Like there's a part of me is I think the key operative thing there. And so, Toews has started training again, started skating again, doing things that could underline could lead to a return. But, I don't think I think it's far from certain that he's going to actually be able to play again. And it's such I love the romance of the story like this potentially, right? A player who in a lot of ways had his career taken from him by that health issue, really by that COVID time. I mean, he discussed in a GQ article about how he got COVID in February 2020 before, people in North America knew what it was. And that's sort of where some of his struggles began. He said everything fell apart at that point with his body. He was struggling, I think mentally too, which just didn't have his usual energy. He was kind of trying to figure out what was going on there. But, I like the idea of him coming back and maybe writing an ending that he feels better about with his career, but I'm just not sure if it's going to be able to happen, man.
Yeah. So when you see people say, hey, think of this team who could be linked to him. I think I've seen a Jonathan Toews Toronto Maple Leafs Photoshop at some point the last few days. You're saying we should pump the brakes on that?
Well, look, I'm certainly not disputing those reports because of Jonathan Toews' name, his resume, his reputation. Like, of course, if he signals to the world that he's going to play professional hockey again, I think it's only natural teams would say, hey, we would look at you, like we would consider you. But, the reputation, the resume, all he's accomplished only gets you in the door. I mean, what's going to keep him on any of those teams if he did end up coming back is what he can do now, right? And, that's the big question mark. I mean, Toews is 36, turning 37 in April. Right now today, there's only 20 skaters in the league that are older than Toews. And none of those skaters took 2 years off, prior to this season. So it would be a difficult achievement. And, it's been done in the past. Mario Lemieux took years off and, came back and had a late renaissance in Pittsburgh. I mean, Guy Lafleur, if you want to go way back when, took some seasons off and came back and, wore, I think, Quebec and the Rangers, was sacrilegious for people that were, diehard Canadians fans to see him in other teams. But the point is it has been done in the past, but I just think the level the league is at now, I'll state the obvious. It's just going to be tough. And, I've spoken to some people that kind of are familiar with the process and where things are at. And, I would just say that there's like a little bit of skepticism there. Everyone wants Jonathan Toews, and I would include myself in this. Like, I don't want to be coming on here and saying he can't do it, because that would be foolish. But it's just, I think we should also be realistic too, that, I want him to find his piece. Like if he really feels like this is something that, he, like an itch he needs to scratch, something that he needs to, by all means go for it. But it would be overlooking how difficult it is to play in the NHL for anybody, to think that he can just step in necessarily and help one of those teams. But if you're those teams, you have nothing to lose by looking at him. One of the things here is it's not clear. Is he going to try to get back? He would have to sign by the deadline, March 7th, to play games this season or to be eligible to play in the playoffs specifically. So, that might be soon, but maybe if we're talking about next season and, there's a fair window of training that can be had there. Maybe it's a PTO. I mean, who knows? I mean, Max Pacioretty, before he signed in Toronto last summer and, actually ended up coming to camp on a PTO, but he came to Toronto and basically skated for the team because he's had a pretty extensive injury history, wasn't a young guy anymore, and they wanted to see what he was before even giving him a chance at training camp. They wanted to see for their own eyes what he could do. And so, there's definitely a road back, but I just think it's quite a bar to clear if Toews can actually do it. And that's why I say I love the romance of a story more than anyone. Like it would be pretty cool to see that happen. It's not the same circumstances, but it's sort of like, Gabriel Landeskog still trying to work his way back in Colorado after all this time off. Mm-hmm. Significant surgery. Like obviously you cheer for players like that, players that, reach the pinnacle of the sport and still feel like they have something in them. But, I felt like just seeing some of like where the conversation is going, that we should be real here, that it's going to be very difficult for him to get back. He's going to try. But we'll have to see where it goes.
Yeah. I do appreciate you framing it that way, because it's very easy for people to kind of run away with it and wonder, which team would he fit in with? Like this, like Jonathan Toews already with a stellar career. If he were healthier, sure, I get it. Plug him into a lineup, but you're right. Like he's had that significant time off.
And do you think, does he want to be a third or fourth line center? Does he want to be?
I mean, that's what he'd have to be, right?
You would think, but he never was that in his career, right? I mean, he was a top line player for 15 years or whatever he was in the league for. And, I'm not trying to answer for him, but I'm saying those are all things he has to consider too. Is he willing to come back and not necessarily get power play time, or maybe just a little bit of power play too? I mean, the way most teams use their power plays now, the second power play unit barely touches the ice. I mean, most teams have an extended PP1. Is he comfortable if he comes back? Because obviously if he's in that kind of role, is he comfortable if he's not really putting up points or counted on to score? Which obviously he was known for his two-way game in the prime of his career, but, he still, produced offense for those Chicago teams. It's just a lot to, I think it's a great idea to say I might want to come back, but then when, I'm just curious to see where it goes when the reality hits, right? I think the best news of all clearly is that he feels good, that he feels that treatment in India, has helped him. I don't know if you saw the photos on his Instagram page.
Yeah.
He looks pretty skinny after going through that. So like, I think he's going to have to definitely beef up the workouts, but the fact he's willing to put a push in the gym to see, where he can get at physically, if to even think about a return. I mean, those are all positive things. But yeah, 37. There's just not a lot of 37-year-olds in the league anymore, man. And that's what he'll be in April.
Yeah. Well, good luck to him. Hope he finds his piece. I did mention the Leafs very briefly. Do we have an update on Jake McCabe? It looked like he went through something pretty scary over the weekend against the Philadelphia Flyers.
Yeah, not a firm update, but certainly a lot of concern around the situation, just because, he got in a fight with Garnet Hathaway, appeared to hit his head as he was falling to the ice. Nothing intentional there, but this is the dangers, of course, of fighting, is something like that can happen. And looked a little dazed, almost tried to get up. This was in Sunday night's game, and had to sit back a little bit and was done for the night there towards the end of the first period. And, McCabe missed time. He took a puck in the helmet or the side of the face in December and missed 5 games then. I don't know if they officially called it a concussion, but it was a suspected concussion or head injury. And so, I'd say there's a high degree of concern this, while he's not certainly the most flashy player on the Leafs, Jake McCabe's been a pretty steady part of that team's success. This is a different Leafs team this year, playing a little better defensively. And I think he's part of that. He gives them some stability there in the bottom end of their lineup. But we'll have to wait to see exactly what the prognosis is. Obviously, if it's another head injury, teams don't always have one, right? I mean, it's more about letting the symptoms clear, encouraging the player to get rest and see where he's at, and those types of things. So yeah, just something to highlight that was kind of a scary moment, and it almost looked like to me too. I don't know if there's anything to it, but that Hathaway skate might have clipped or hit him near the midsection, near the stomach area. Again, totally by accident, just as they were flailing and they fell to the ice. I'm particularly nervous all the time with these skate cuts. We've just seen such an abundance of them. Obviously, had a tragic one in England last year. And so, yeah, I mean, that's the update is there isn't an update, but it's, I think the Leafs are a little concerned about McCabe because of how important he is and obviously the nature of his potential injury there.
For sure. And considering at least just what I was able to see on social media, that did look pretty scary. So I'm glad we were able to get that update in. Some more news that happened over the weekend. Frank Vatrano, 3-year contract extension, $18 million, but a ton of deferred salary. First contract to have deferred salary. So Seth Jarvis, I believe his signing bonus was deferred, if I have that right.
Yeah, and Jacob Slavin actually before Jarvis, but I mean, both this past summer. And then actually Jake McCabe, unfortunately, but he signed an extension with the Leafs in late October, early November that had deferred signing bonuses. What's interesting about the Frank Vatrano signing bonus for anyone who doesn't know is the total value of the contract that he signed is $18 million, $9 million. So half of the deal is deferred and it's deferred to 10 years of payments, $900,000 per year beyond the life of the deal. And so that is by far the most we've seen a player push out the payments in a deferred salary situation. That means the Ducks got the biggest cap benefit of any team. Instead of that being, it's an $18 million 3-year deal, we would typically call that a $6 million average annual cap charge. It's actually $4.57 million. So they got it down almost $1.5 million per season because those payments are pushed out so much. And I still think this isn't going to be a niche thing. It's a bit controversial. You probably saw Alan Walsh actually right after this was announced, kind of coming out on social media and saying he thinks these are bad idea for players to sign these contracts. The reason for that, and I don't want to speak for Alan, but I have spoken because I wrote a story about this in November to a lot of GMs and agents around the league about their feelings about these deals is there's most players generally speaking want their money today. Because then you can invest it, you can take it where you want to take it, you can theoretically and hopefully earn lots of interest on it. And, essentially the money that Vatrano has put aside here, the $9 million, it's locked up. And yes, it's given an interest rate application, but also he's going to get $900,000 in 10 years. That's not the same as getting $900,000 today just because of inflation and the present value of money concept. And so without going too deep into the math on it, generally speaking, most players want as much money up front as possible. That's why you see all the top guys, they get $15 million signing bonuses, even though their average contract is say $12 million, because they want as much money in their bank as soon as they can to put it to work for them. And so I still don't think these are going to be we're not going to see a rash of these, but they do make sense in individual circumstances. And one thing here is this helped break a stalemate. The Ducks and Vatrano's camp had gone back and forth. They each kind of were fixated on getting to the deal to a certain point. And this allowed Vatrano to feel like he got a bit more money. There's obviously tax benefits too that I didn't highlight is he's going to be getting those $900,000 yearly payments when he doesn't live in California, which has a very high state income tax. It's the same idea behind Shohei Ohtani's monster contract with tons of deferred salary in LA with the Dodgers. He's going to be living in a tax-friendly jurisdiction when $680 million of the $700 million in that deal gets paid out. So it's not to say there isn't benefits. And also, look, not everyone's a great saver. Not everyone, this is guaranteed $900,000 a year, even if $900,000 in the future isn't as much as it is today. It's not crazy to imagine it's still going to be a significant amount of money and good for Vatrano's family. So, this one, we've seen a few of these, as you mentioned, Julian, but I think there's a few aspects of this that are different. The other one that maybe we didn't touch on is the Ducks are the first team that isn't kind of a win now team that signed a deal like this, right? Like Carolina and Toronto are obviously trying to lower the cap hits, to keep all their players as much as they can, trying to win a Stanley Cup this year. I mean, the Ducks, it's a signal that they believe they're going to enter a competitive window here in the next year or two. And so they're obviously lowering Vatrano's salary or his cap charge in doing this. And I think they want to signal to other players around the league, or maybe their own players that have contracts coming up, that they're willing to be creative. So, it's kind of a surprising team, I would say, somewhat to sign this sort of deal. But yeah, and it's basically Anaheim thinks they're going to be playing for real games, games with playoff implications in the near future here, because they had the option to trade Frank Vatrano. He was on the trade board the last one in December, but he'll be off when the next one comes out this week.
Are you planning on updating that trade board anytime soon? Yes,
I think Wednesday we have penciled in as the drop date. So there's actually been we did it right before the holiday roster freeze, but there was a couple trades there in December that invalidated names on their Capo Caco deal, Will Borgen, the like, Carrier going to Montreal. And so there's actually going to be a fair number of new names on the board, and obviously some of those players will be taken off after already being dealt.
All right. So when we do our show on Thursday, I'll definitely ask you about said trade. Maybe the aforementioned Pettersson and Miller make appearances on said trade board. Maybe
I'm wrestling with that. I mean, they have to be on there. I kind of feel like they have to be at the top just because of who they are, but then there's also the chance they don't get traded. I haven't figured out how the trade board is. It's art. It's not science, right? Like it doesn't follow. It doesn't say that these 25 or 30 names are definitely being traded, or this is the order that they're coveted. It's about presenting some of the names in play, trying to give a sense of where the market is, the options teams have. So there's no hard and fast rules, but I can assure you those Vancouver names will likely be there, and wouldn't surprise me if they're at the top.
Okay. Have you checked I'm sure you check the standings every day, but I just can't get over how close the Eastern wildcard race is right now. We're recording on Monday morning, January 6th. Tampa and Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is in a playoff spot. Pittsburgh has a minus 27 goal differential, but they're in a playoff spot, and not too far behind them, Ottawa, Columbus, Montreal, Philadelphia, Detroit, the New York Rangers, the New York Islanders, and then 4 points behind the Islanders and Rangers, the Buffalo Sabres. But I get it. We're at the halfway point of the year. It is damn close in the Eastern Conference for a wild card playoff spot. Do you think that's going to continue throughout the season?
Yeah, as I see it, I think there's probably going to be one team, at least one team that gets in that people will say at the start of the season, I didn't see that. I mean, honestly, even if Montreal gets in, like we've seen them sort of, I think everyone's been anticipating a climb, but I don't think a lot of people outside that market or that aren't fans of the team were predicting they would be a playoff team. And they've put themselves right in the mix. I mean, they just beat on the same road trip the last 4 Stanley Cup champions. I mean, it's kind of a weird trivia thing, but I mean, they went in and won in tough buildings in Colorado and Vegas, Florida and Tampa. So, the Canadians, look, they've had their surge. I mean, it's a little like Ottawa before Christmas. Like I don't want to get ahead of myself because, teams can win 4 or 5 or 6 in a row, or 5 of 6, 6 of 7 type of thing. But then you usually have your fallback too. And so, but they've full credit to them. They've surged into this picture. Pittsburgh really, we dumped on them a lot in October when they had a tough start, but they've kind of gotten it together and they're in the race. I mean, Columbus, who would have called Columbus?
That might be the biggest surprise for me in all of this. I did not see Columbus in any of these mixes at all. I did not project this.
Right. And give credit to, Dean Evison, who's a new head coach there. Obviously the players, having lived through the Johnny Gaudreau tragedy just before the season. I mean, there just was all kinds of reasons for this to be another year where they're at the absolute bottom. They have talent, right? They've been drafting pretty high for the last little while. They've had some good young players. I think the Sean Monahan signing has really worked out for them here in the short term. And yeah, they're in the mix. I mean, I still, it's half a season to go. It's hard to think that they emerged from this pack and grab a playoff spot. But, I actually saw they did a social video at the New Year, and it was sort of like New Year's wishes or New Year's resolutions, and they were getting the players as they were walking to the practice ice, and a bunch of the guys said playoffs. And if you didn't look at the standings, you might laugh. Like, what are these Blue Jackets guys talking about the playoffs? But they can talk about that. They're legitimately in the race there. So it's interesting. And what's opened it up lately too, and this is where you don't want to get too day-to-day watching, I don't think, in early January. But, the Bruins have dropped 4 straight. The Lightning have dropped 4 straight. And, those are the teams that are kind of, all of a sudden, that's just brought the picture for those below them into the window. Now, the Lightning, when you look at goal differential, they still are one of the better teams in the league in that department. So I'm inclined to believe it's just sort of a tough California stretch for them, and that they'll, reel off 4 or 5 wins in a row pretty soon and be clear. But the East, I'll say this, the East in general is hard for me to get my mind around. I put a mailbag up Monday at The Athletic, and one of the reader questions was, not to preempt Ask CJ, but was rank the divisions, the team, like which is the toughest divisions. And I think I ended up going Pacific, then Central, but I know for sure I had the 2 Western Conference divisions, 1, 2. And then I think I went Atlantic, Metro. We can have a debate about that. The point is, I don't know what to make of the East this year. Washington's had a great season. I believe Washington and Toronto are the only teams by point percentage in the top 8 in the league right now. So from the East, I mean, right. The teams in the West, you've got Vegas at the top. Edmonton's had a really strong 6-7 weeks. If you look back after their slow start, Dallas, Minnesota has been a surprise this year. I think that they're a tough team. So anyway, it's a long way of saying I don't know what the hell to make of the Eastern Conference. We got half a season to go here, but someone's going to surprise us. I don't know. Ottawa, Montreal, Pittsburgh, Columbus, step right up. But somebody's got a chance to make the playoffs that I don't think too many people were predicting. And, part of it's the Rangers falling out too. The other,
yeah.
They're a team that won the entire regular season last year, and right now just don't look like a good bet to get even back to the playoffs.
Yeah, Columbus and Pittsburgh, the 2 biggest surprises for me. While I still don't think Montreal is going to make the playoffs, I sort of expected that they would take a step up and at least be in that conversation where they would fight for a playoff spot. Do
you know anything about this goalie that's come up and kind of
Jakob Dobish?
Yes.
I forget how long he's been in their system, but he's been off to an incredible start. And I think if you're the Montreal Canadiens, you can look at, I think you could rely on multi-bowl Dobish for time now. And Caden Primo, I think he's number 3 now. I think he's been jumped.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when you go through last year, think about it. Montreal intentionally, they carried 3 goalies for most of the season, right? Until they traded Jake Allen, because they didn't want to lose Primo on waivers. This year, they put him on waivers. I mean, it's a sign, he's really struggled this season when he played, so he didn't play a lot. But it just shows you he's definitely number 3 for the moment. The beautiful thing though, and look at, you're dealing with covering the Senators. A lot of teams have 3 to 4 goalies now, and they're just, I mean, I don't want to call them interchangeable because that's not fair to the guys at the top, but a lot of teams don't have a defined 2, 3, 4. Sometimes it's a little murky, and maybe that's really more a reflection of what's going on in Montreal.
Do you think the Ottawa Senators are going to do something with their goalie? I think if it gets tougher for them going forward, I could see them doing something. But
there's no goalies available though.
It's tough.
That's the thing. I mean, obviously John Gibson has been forever available in Anaheim. I don't think that kind of trade makes sense for Ottawa, given, he's signed for years and has dollars, and they already have Allmark, obviously. I just don't see a lot of goalies around the league that are definitely available. I mean, you have guys like Dan Vladar in Calgary, Vejmelka in Utah that are pending UFAs that I could see a set of circumstances where maybe they're moved before the deadline, but I don't see them being moved on, January 6th. Because both those teams are in playoff positions, and especially Utah, I think that it's important for them to play as many meaningful games as they can. And so I don't think they're going to wave a white flag. And so there might be some veteran out there that I'm not aware of or I'm not thinking of, but even James Reimer, he's playing with the Sabres. I don't think the Sabres aren't going to throw a lifeline to the Senators, if you want to think anyway.
Yes.
So I'm not saying there isn't a goaltender out there, but is there someone worth them? Is there someone that's a clear upgrade worth going to get? And right now, I might be missing someone, but I don't see it.
Chris Driedger is still playing. Justin Tokarski was. I mean, Carolina.
Tokarski played for Carolina yesterday, though. Like they're not gonna.
Yeah, they're not gonna. They're likely not going to move on from him. It's just you got to buy low. I like because right now I think the Senators just need a stopgap. Right. I think Levi Merilainen did okay. In the last few games, he was able to play for them. So at least you could keep him around. And I still think if Anton Forsberg plays well enough, those talks of another backup goalie can kind of just stop. This guy was off for a couple weeks with an injury. Right. But it's just that, he didn't play well against St. Louis. So I think that's where it's stemming from. But
it's I don't know. Look, it's nightmare fuel for that organization because they identified, obviously, goaltending as a major need. They make the Allmark trade. They sign him to the big contract. And then they see the proof of concept, right? Like that December run was fueled a lot by Linus Ullmark's play. Like he was a major story in most of those wins. And now he's, what are they calling it? Week to week?
Yep.
The fact he hasn't skated is your red flag though.
Yep. Big red flag.
Because
I was at practice yesterday, not skating.
How long's he been off for? Is that 10 days? I'm just saying the ramp up once he does skate, especially for goalie, like it's going to take some time. Like the point is they can't count on having him anywhere in the near future here. And I don't see any help. So Sen's got to maybe just tighten it up. And, you've seen this happen. Maybe there's a Jakub Dobish story for the Sens and one of their less heralded guys, maybe channel their inner Andrew Hammond from back in the day and just find a way to win with, a player that doesn't have the reputation or the background, obviously, of Allmark.
Could be Merilainen. Could be Anton Forsberg too. Who knows? We'll be following.
Or it could sink the season. This is what it's like to be a fan, right? And you can only imagine being in management because, it's hard to watch. I'm sure it's hard to watch knowing that all the good that's seeming to happen might, that being a little bit weak at that position right now is a major stumbling hurdle.
All right, we've gone through the headlines of the day. It's time for questions. You ready to answer some questions brought on from Twitter, Blue Sky, Discord?
Yeah. Did you get any by carrier pigeon?
Not this week. I think it's too cold outside for the pigeons.
I know you didn't get any mail. I mean, in Canada here, we've only just come through this mail strike. I feel like I don't know if like half the letters I sent got to where they're supposed to go.
The other day, I ordered these books and like they just showed up a little later than I needed them to, but they showed up. Anyway.
My nephew's Christmas present still hasn't arrived.
No,
it is.
When did you get them?
January 6th, and I ordered it. I didn't order it on the 23rd. I ordered it like the 15th or 12th or something in December.
Are you allowed to say what the gift is? Are you trying not to still spoil it?
Occasionally he listens. Not every show, but
oh man,
it's funny because he was negotiating with me. I got him a smaller gift to like at least give him something to open at Christmas. And I was like, don't worry, Henry. Like as soon as I get this, I'm going to wrap it up and, have it sent to you in Ottawa. And he's like, well, what is it? Like, just tell me. Like he wanted me to tell him the gift. I'm like, that takes away all the fun of opening a gift that you're not expecting.
Oh, poor Henry. Henry, you'll get your gift, buddy.
He'll be fine. It's just like semi-annoying but look at first world problem. He's going to get a nice gift. It's just going to, I don't know. It might not get here till February. It's going to be a birthday gift if this keeps up.
Don't worry, little Henry. You'll get your gift. All right, let's get to these questions for Ask CJ. The real Ask CJ. I know you got to do the Ask CJ for the mailbag, but this is the real Ask CJ.
Oh, man. Sorry for the coughing, but I've been sick for 3 weeks.
No, I'm sorry, man. Dude, I've had so many of these shows where I've been sick. Like, you don't have to apologize. It's okay.
My buddy Jonas Siegel texted us after our last show. He's like, are you still sick? Because he could hear it in my voice. So,
man. Timorius asks, the two of you have written articles together for The Athletic. What is your collaborative process? Is it easier or more difficult than writing your own article?
I think it's always easier to write your own article. This isn't a comment on Julian. I just in general, because you have your own brain and you just lay out the story as you see it straight from your brain to your fingers. But it's always great to work with someone else. In the case of the one story I remember us writing, Julian was in Toronto covering a Flames Leafs game at the time last season. And I believe he was the one with his laptop out in the bar post game, and he was doing most of the writing. I think I was working the phone a little bit, trying to help get some info to pad out the story. But the truth is, I've heard this since I've come to The Athletic. I never heard this before, but somebody has to hold the pen. Like at the end of the day, somebody kind of has to do a lot of the writing. Doesn't mean sometimes you might write a story and then leave a section for someone else on something specific that they've either done an interview on or have some expertise on. But it's funny. I'm currently working on a couple bigger features that I'm sharing a byline with, one with Dan Robson, that we're going to drop ahead of the Four Nations face-off. And, you know, the cool thing is I think everyone has different strengths. You know, some people are more talented writers. Some people maybe are information. I think of myself kind of as an information person. Like you can blend your strengths and produce a stronger story that way. But Julian, you should add what you think here. I don't think there's one way to do it though. It's like you kind of with each person you work with, you just kind of have to find your rhythm. And, you know, obviously just go back and forth and maybe tweak it and get to something both people are comfortable with.
Yeah. Like I think all of the stories we've done together have been in that information category where a new story drops and what we're supposed to do is just figure out what's going on, add whatever extra analysis we can do, and then put out the story. I don't think we've done a story together.
A feature kind of like where we've done a bunch of interviews.
Exactly. And I imagine the process for that would be very different. I've done like a few of those stories with other people at The Athletic, and it's kind of just everyone has a very different process. Like working
somebody has to take the lead though. You know what I mean? Like at the end of the day.
Yeah, I get that. Like I
on the writing part, I don't mean that to take the lead.
I get you.
You know, like with Dan Robson, he's a friggin' monster writer. Like I hope Dan's not listening because I'm assigning him. But like we've both done a bunch of interviews for this one. Like the one in story we're working on, I think I've done 10 interviews for, say. Like I envision at some point I'll give him all those quotes. We'll talk about it, and then I'm not saying he writes the whole story, but maybe he writes the top. That's the other thing. Writing the top, I find the first 4 paragraphs can be half the time of the total writing period. Once you have the direction set by the top of your story, I find generally it's pretty clear how to tell the rest. Anyway, it's a hard thing to talk about. Honestly, it's sort of like anything, you just sort of do it.
Yeah, you have to be in it. Like like I said, like I was about to say, it's different for everyone you work with. Like, but to your point, yes, I think there are people who naturally want to take the lead on certain things. There are other people who are kind of just like, all right, you know what? Like I did this part, I threw it in here, you throw in your part, we could just make it all like mesh together. Like a Fluo Shinzawa is very different from a Thomas Drance. And I'm not saying that to disparage one or the other. It's just those two are very different people to work with. But yeah, I don't know. I think our process together, because of the fact that it's pretty straightforward what we're supposed to do in that situation, very different compared to like if we had to do a ton of interviews for a feature, more in-depth story, which I would still love to do with you one.
Of course, yeah. It's easier too when you have a relationship with the person. Like you can
that too.
Like it can be like a little bit. It's almost like a first date vibes if you don't really know the other writer as well, and like who takes the like it's just like it can be a little bit. Whereas with Julian, obviously, I mean we've only sat and done 300 plus of these shows together, and we're in contact all the time. Like I think it's just easier to have a very straightforward conversation and not worry about the other's feelings or anything like that. So.
Yeah,
it's weird. I've never in my career done as many shared byline stories. Like it's something that's more common at The Athletic than the previous places I've worked. I like it. It's totally different than writing your own story. I'll say that.
The one thing I'll say before I get to another question, I think for those types of stories where you're sharing a byline, the story wins for me at the end of the day. Like I might have an idea of what I want the story to look like, and the person I'm working with might have a different idea. Ultimately, whatever tells that story the best has to win. And
of course, but it's hard. Maybe two people like think their idea is the best. Like I don't mean that you're like fighting with someone.
No.
But especially with a feature, it's hard. Like when you do, let's say you've done 15 interviews for a story, there's usually more than one way you could start that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And it's possible 2 people or 3 people or however many are working on it might look at that and not have the same, might see it different ways.
For sure. I'm just making the point that I'm willing 9 times out of 10. Hopefully this doesn't sound like me like propping myself here. I would much rather just say all right, you know what? I think I see it the other way, where the story can be told this way. There are very few details of the story that I'm willing to bring up where I know I want to die on this hill and make sure it's there. Because at the end of the day, I want this to be right. This is I'm getting mine regardless. And the story's going to come out great. I want it to be great. And I want to reflect on both of us, but I'm willing to just put ego aside to make that work. I guess there haven't been too many times, I'm just trying to say, where I've had a detail where I've been yes, please, we need this in there. I know I can do it, but a lot of times, if I see someone else write it and I'm you know what, I get this could work. I just think that that has to be part of that process.
Yeah, and it should be like that with editors too. And it's even if it's a story you're doing yourself. As you say, at the end of the day, all that matters is you put out the best thing you can. Plus, we're all writing a bunch of stories a week. We're not writing
that's it.
We're not writing a definitive history of something or whatever. So no reason to fret over every single word.
Thanks to Morris for that question. We could have probably done a whole workshop on that. Victor asks, what's going on with the Avs and Mikko Rantanen?
Not a whole lot. I think that both sides have a good idea of their positions. I think Mikko Rantanen looks at the $14 million extension Leon Draisaitl signed before the season and says, I'm pretty comparable to that. Mikko Rantanen, in addition to just being a beast, so he's coming off a couple 100-point seasons, he's been a huge performer in the playoffs as well for the Avalanche. His playoff numbers are impressive. That was one thing that stood about Draisaitl, right? Not only is he a guy who's scored 50 goals and 100 points and all those things, but he's been a beast in the playoffs, and I think that helped get him that number. And I think everyone's comfortable just kind of letting things play as they will. The thing is, when you're Colorado, I can understand you've got Nathan McKinnon signed. He's, kind of the engine of your team. Do you want to pay someone more than him? I don't know exactly how it's going to go at this point, but where it seems to be at is I think the sides understand their positions. It's an important year for the Avalanche, and I think they're going to let it play out a little bit longer, and we'll see where they end up.
Okay. Matthew asks, hi, CJ and Julian. Is it possible for Cobourg Papa to be a co-host at the January 17th live CJ show in Cobourg? Thank you. Take care and Happy New Year.
Well, it's possible because I have an in with him, but I don't know if he's going to want to, and he's going to be there, but I don't know if he's going to want to do that. So I can't speak for him, but certainly he'll be there. And, maybe we'll get him on stage even for a few minutes. I once actually years ago, I did a podcast with him where we appeared on a podcast together.
Oh.
And that was pretty cool. So I haven't talked to him. I don't know what he's up for, but, he hasn't missed an episode. He jokes that he's 110%er because he listens to a lot of them twice. So he's certainly not going to miss a live show. That's about a 6-minute drive from his house.
Please send me the podcast with you and your dad on it. That sounds really fun.
It's old. I'm going to have to see if I can dig it up. I think it was around 2016 or 17, I want to say. But I'll see if I can find it. If so, I'll send it your way. I think I remember, if I remember correctly, again, it was so long ago, I don't remember exactly, but I think the host was asking questions of my dad about watching me do my job and growing up. And yeah, it was pretty sweet. It was, gave us a chance to reflect on the fact that he got to watch my dreams come true.
That last line just right at the heartstrings. This one from Memory. This could go in the Hall of Weird Questions.
Oh, good.
Question for CJ and Julian. I was listening to the segment on how the All-Star game is stale because it's NHL players at 25% when the intensity and skill is what we love. What would you think of an All-Star weekend format where they keep the skills competition, but instead of the All-Star game, all of those great NHL athletes participate in a variety of other sports in a tournament format? Connor McDavid's team taking on Austin's crew in inner tube water polo. Brady and Matthew Tkachuk going head-to-head in wheelchair basketball, anyone? You could have 3 to 4 sports every year that continuously change and showcase athleticism and competitiveness while making it fun and avoiding injury. Curious your thoughts and what your top sports to include would be. I don't know if they're avoiding injury with some of those sports that were mentioned. I'm sorry.
I appreciate the creativity, but no way.
Me too.
It's too weird.
Me too. Memery, shout out to you, dog. That's one of the more creative ones. That's one of the more creative ones.
I don't want to, but there's no chance that's happening. Again, I don't think you could get the athletes to care about those other sports, whatever they were. Even the closest you might get, but like lots of podcasts have tapped into this, is a lot of hockey players are pretty good golfers. Like the closest you could maybe get is a pretty competitive golf thing, but I mean, you can already see that in various places. Back to the drawing board.
Wait, the golf thing though, is there not a blueprint set with when TNT airs those like athlete versus athlete kind of back and forths, and like Charles Barkley gets involved, or like Tom Brady and Pat Mahomes, weren't they involved in one? Like, what if you did like an NHL comparable, right? And you mic up the players, and what if you mic up the players? You get Charles Barkley on the golf course, you make jokes with them. Like, there's
a celebrity golf tournament every year, and like Joe Pavelski, I know, has played in it in Tahoe in the offseason. Like, I think let's not go further down this road.
Okay. All right. Or I guess Paul Bissonnette, could replace Charles, but you probably want Charles there.
I just don't.
You really don't like this idea at all.
No, well, it's too weird. Like at the end of the day, we want to showcase hockey, right? I shouldn't say we. Doesn't matter what we want. The NHL is going to want to showcase hockey.
Yeah. I mean, we could say we a little bit. Like we want the game to be
right, but if the NHL is going to make this decision,
very fair.
We're
Very
at
fair. Okay.
I just think
so
we're. I think
not
we're
in favor. You're not in favor of this idea.
We're at the end of All-Star games in our lifetime.
Yeah.
I think we is what I'm getting at.
But then, how do we do? Like, I mean, yes, we discussed why they still happen in the sponsors and stuff, but like, I guess there is nothing we could really do about that, or there is no real alternative.
In-season tournaments, international events. There's lots of things.
I love the in-season tournament idea. I just don't.
The NHL. Remember, they had a Ryder Cup idea at one point that I think could be interesting. North America versus the world, or whatever, Europe, or I don't know how it would be, but in like a 7-game series. Anyway, I think there's lots of things that you could do that still showcase hockey and the athletes that are a little more compelling. That's all.
Adam is wondering if the Detroit Red Wings and the Buffalo Sabres, are they cooking up a trade?
Not that I'm aware of. No, I mean, Buffalo was involved in a lot of trade discussion, prior to the holiday break. I think that if something makes sense for them, their team that's going to, make a move. But I don't think with each other doesn't necessarily, I don't see a fit there. And, the Red Wings made their big move with the coaching change. See where things land with Todd McLellan. But I don't sense anything cooking between those teams, and frankly, even individuals of each other.
And Sports Ethan asks, the 3 bottom teams in the East are the 3 New York teams, the Rangers, the Islanders, and the Sabres. Which of these teams do you think will be the first to climb out of the basement and win a playoff round?
Well, the Rangers aren't that far removed from winning a couple playoff rounds. Mm-hmm. Rangers, Islanders, and the Sabres. Well, I mean, I still think the Rangers are the safe bet there. So I'll say Rangers are the next of those 3 teams to win the next playoff round. But they've won a bunch, even the Islanders in recent memory. So
big money.
Or how about hot take? Maybe the Devils win at least a playoff round this coming year. You've forgotten I know they're New Jersey technically, but
yeah, they're also not in the bottom 3.
Let's not forget about the Devils.
Yeah, we don't forget about the Devils on this podcast. Big Buddy Siege, great work as always. Thank you to everyone who sent in questions, whether over X, Twitter, whatever, Blue Sky, Discord, however you get questions to us. We appreciate it. We'll be back on Thursday with a brand new episode. Did you want to wrap up and say something before we get off?
No, my voice is gone.
I hope for a lozenge in your future and some rest. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Peace.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.